Hello, and today we're going to continue on with community ecology, talking about patterns in communities. So, what properties are the most important in structuring a community, and what determines the number of species in a community? And how do communities recover from disturbances? So, species richness is the number of species in a community, a simple count of the species in the community. And so each species contribute as one to the total, regardless of their population. So, for example, if we had we'll use my favorite kind of example right now. If we had some gummy worms and some gummy rings, and some gummy stars. I know these aren't stars. We're pretending they're gummy stars. Okay, we'll call them gummy raindrops. Gummy raindrops. Uh, Here, a species richness, we would look and we would count this and go 1, 2, 3. There's only 3 species there. Where species evenness is the relative abundance of each species. So this takes into account how common each species is in the community. So we must count or estimate the population size of all of the species. So latitude is the distance from the equator, and species richness varies with latitude. So the closer a community is to the equator, the higher the species richness. This is why the tropical rainforests are some of the most diverse biocommunities and why they're called the cradle. They're called a museum and a cradle because they have some of the oldest species there and they're giving birth to new species all the time. Why there's a more stable climate and there's more energy available for the food web due to a higher amount of producers, due to the climate and having the sun hit it perfectly for those 12 hours a day. So a species area effect is that larger areas usually contain more species than smaller areas. Why? The larger areas contain a greater diversity of habitats and then can support more species. Habitat destruction. Reducing the size of a habitat reduces the number of species that habitat can support. So habitat destruction is the number one reason species become endangered and possibly extinct. We lose about 2% of our tropical rainforest each year due to habitat destruction. Predation and species richness. Predation can also promote species richness by keeping prey populations in check. For example, here on the right, we have the sea star Pisaster ocraceus, which promotes diversity by controlling the mussel species Mytilus population. And what they do is you have the sea star and they go and they wrap around the mussel and using the little suckers that they have, they pry it open and eat the mussel from the inside. It's really neat and I'll show you a video in class next time. So a keystone species, some organisms have a greater effect on communities than others, and a keystone species is a plant or animal that plays a unique and crucial role in the way that ecosystem functions. And without this keystone species, the ecosystem would be dramatically different or cease to exist altogether. So the removal of a keystone species would have a substantial ripple effect and alter a large portion of the food web. For example, the gray wolves in Yellowstone. The gray wolves in Yellowstone were the keystone species. It kept deer populations in check, and keeping the deer population in check kept them from eating an overabundance of different plants that was native there. And what ended up happening was once the wolves were gone because humans started encroaching, started hunting them, and essentially moving the wolves out of Yellowstone, the deer population exploded. And as the deer population exploded, they started eating all of those plants that other animals depended on. For example, beavers. So as all of those plants that were needed started going away because the deer population boomed, those animals like beavers and other birds and other consumers started to go away as well. They started reintroducing the they started reintroducing the gray wolf back in the early 80s, though a full plan wasn't released until 1985. And so what ended up happening with that is slowly, and it's still going to take years and years and years before Yellowstone becomes like it used to be, but the deer population started to go back down in number because the wolves were there, and the plants that used to be there are now starting to come back, and we're starting to get all of those animals back as well, but it's going to take years. An invasive species is a plant or animal that's not native to that location, and this usually outcompetes the native species, thus changing the community. The qualities that allow for an invasive species to outcompete is multiplying easily, adaptability to a wide range of living conditions, eating a varied and non-specific diet, resistant to pesticides, and having no natural predators. Having those 5 things, an invasive species can outcompete and take over an ecosystem. So here we have a tilapia and a Nile perch, and they all live in the same area, and it just shows that all life is connected. Invasive species are the second reason why organisms are currently becoming endangered. A community will undergo a disturbance at some point. Examples of disturbances are fire, diseases, flood, etc. Communities with higher species richness and evenness, though, are able to better resist the disturbances. Disturbances can also promote species richness by killing off some species and letting some new ones grow. So here we have a food chain, and if one of these was to be wiped out, the food chain would dramatically change. For example, if we got rid of the locusts, our food chain would dramatically change. Where if we look at this food web, the more links between the species will mean an ecosystem will be less affected if a disturbance occurs.